I used to think silence was dangerous, that if I ever stopped moving, thinking achieving, I'd fall apart. My life looked successful from the outside, a six-figure tech job, a smart apartment downtown, a calendar packed with meetings, workouts, networking, brunches, mindfulness apps, and sleep trackers. But none of that could drown out what I felt the moment I woke up each morning, this quiet ache in my chest that said something wasn't right. The problem was, I couldn't name it. It wasn't burnout exactly, it wasn't sadness either. It was more like disconnection. Like I was watching my own life from a distance, and everything felt just a little out of sync. I kept pushing through, telling myself it was temporary, just a phase, but the truth is I was scared. Scared that if I slowed down even for a second, the whole thing would collapse. Scared that maybe I was the one who would collapse. Then one night, everything cracked. It was after a long day filled with back-to-back calls. I had just finished presenting a project I didn't even believe in. My smile had been stuck on autopilot for hours. I climbed into my car to drive home, sat behind the wheel, and just froze. I couldn't move. The city lights blurred behind the windshield. I had my hands on the wheel, but no will to drive. And in that strange stillness, it hit me. I didn't know how to be with myself. Without deadlines, without screens, without someone telling me who I was supposed to be, I was lost. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, hollow. Eventually, I pulled out my phone, not to call anyone. I wasn't ready to talk. I opened YouTube and typed, "How to feel again." Yeah, that's where I was. One video popped up. Black screen, white text. "Listen to Rumi for 30 minutes, it will change your life forever." I clicked it. Not because I believed it honestly, I was too numb to believe anything at that point, but because something in the title felt different, and the voice began. "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep." That first line landed in my chest like a breath. I didn't know I needed, and for the first time in a long time I listened, not just with my ears, with my attention. My whole body leaned into that silence between the words. The voice spoke about solitude, about masks, about the self that exists beneath all performance. It wasn't religious. It wasn't self-help, hype. It was quiet, raw, present. It didn't tell me what to do. It asked me to stop chasing, to stop proving, to just be. That night, something shifted. Not dramatically, there was no epiphany, but I remember thinking, maybe the silence isn't empty, maybe it's what I've been running from all along. I didn't sleep well. But for once, the insomnia wasn't filled with anxiety, it was filled with something slower, something still. The next morning, I made a decision I didn't tell anyone about. I emailed my team and requested 2 weeks off. I booked a small cabin out in Colorado, a place with no Wi-Fi, no TV, no distractions. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew one thing I needed to hear, that silence again. Not through a screen this time, not through borrowed words, but for myself. I didn't pack much. Just clothes, a journal, some food, and that same Rumi audio downloaded to my phone. I left my smartwatch on the counter, left my calendar untouched, turned off all notifications. And as I drove away from the city, something inside me began to loosen. I didn't realize how much of my identity was built on being available, responsive, useful. But as the skyline faded in my rearview mirror, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: space. I arrived at the cabin just before sunset. It was silent, not eerie, just honest. The wind outside wasn't competing with anything. The trees weren't trying to be seen. That night, I sat by the fireplace and hit play on the Rumi audio again. This time it felt different because now I wasn't hearing it from the middle of my chaos. I was hearing it from the edge. There is a presence that lives beneath your name, your roles, your habits. I wrote that line down, underlined it twice. I didn't fully understand it yet, but it stayed with me like a quiet knock from the inside. I slept deeply that night. No dreams, just a slow, steady return to something I had forgotten was mine. Rest. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No dramatic farewell. No cryptic off-grid post. I just left. There was something sacred about that. about slipping out of the noise without needing the noise to notice. The drive to Colorado was quiet, not just outside, but inside. I didn't listen to music, no podcasts, not even the Rumi audio this time, just the hum of the engine, the steady blur of highway lines, and my own thoughts finally beginning to surface. For the first few hours, it felt freeing. But then as the roads got narrower and the signal bars disappeared, something inside me started to tighten. What am I doing? Who am I without a schedule, without an inbox, without a version of myself reflected back by someone else? It's funny, I thought solitude would feel peaceful. Instead, it felt like being slowly stripped of everything familiar. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky had already turned a heavy gray. There were no neighbors, just trees, the kind that didn't care if you succeeded. Inside, the space was small, just a single bed, a table, a wood stove, and windows that stared into miles of stillness. No distractions, no mirrors. Just me. At first, I kept trying to fill the silence. I cleaned, rearranged the food, read the label on my toothpaste twice, anything to avoid sitting still. But the stillness waited. That first night, I lit a fire, made tea, and sat in the center of the room, and I felt it. This almost physical weight of my own presence, no emails to answer, no people to impress, no agenda. Just me and whatever was underneath all the noise I used to call life. I didn't like what I found. Guilt for time I never gave to my mother. Shame for the friend I ghosted when their life got too messy. Grief for a version of myself I had abandoned a long time ago. It all surfaced. Not loudly, not with drama, but with this quiet ache like bruises I hadn't realized were there until I pressed too hard. I wrote for hours. Not perfectly, not poetically, just honestly. At one point I wrote, I don't miss my life. I miss who I was before I started pretending I had one. That line hit something. I put the pen down and just stared at the wall. Then I remembered a passage I had read in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. People look for retreats for themselves in the country, by the coast, or in the mountains. You are especially prone to this, but this is all quite unphilosophical. When it is in your power, whenever you choose to retreat into yourself. I remember laughing out loud. Here I was thinking the retreat was the cabin, but the real retreat, the real escape was in facing myself. And that was the part I had been running from. The next day I left my phone powered off and hidden in a drawer. I didn't even trust myself to look at the lock screen. Instead, I sat outside. The wind moved through the trees like an old song. Birds came and went without fanfare, and I watched it all, not as someone scrolling for dopamine, but as someone present for the first time in years. But even in the quiet, my mind was still noisy. It kept tugging at me with thoughts. You're wasting time. You're falling behind. You're not being productive. I noticed something. My inner critic didn't need an audience. It had become internalized noise on repeat. That night, I caught myself pacing around the cabin, my body restless, my hands itching to do something, so I did nothing. I sat cross-legged on the floor and let the discomfort rise like smoke. I stared at the fire and whispered to myself, this is the work. It wasn't about escaping life. It was about returning to it without all the layers I used to wear. That night, I dreamed I was underwater sinking. And when I stopped struggling, I could breathe. I woke up in tears. I didn't fully understand the dream, but it felt like the first time in a long time that I let myself feel something all the way through. The cabin wasn't teaching me anything new. It was unteaching me everything I thought I knew. The idea that value comes from productivity, that connection comes from constant interaction, that peace comes from control, it was all being dismantled. Gently, patiently, like leaves falling in slow motion. Later that week, I picked up Meditations again, and this line stopped me cold. If you are disturbed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. I read it again. Then I wrote in my journal, maybe the pain isn't from being alone, maybe it's from the belief that I shouldn't be. And just like that, something shifted, not dramatically, not like a breakthrough, more like a slow exhale. I didn't know I was holding. I stepped outside barefoot in the cold, stood still, and for the first time, the stillness didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Not the peace of absence, but the peace of presence without the need to perform. That's when I realized solitude doesn't strip you. It reveals you, and what it reveals isn't always comfortable, but it's always true. The third morning in the cabin started without sound. No birds, no wind, no firewood crackling, just silence. Dense, thick like fluid pressing against my skin. I sat up in bed and something felt off, like the world had shifted a few inches to the left. While I was asleep, the peace I had been building was gone, replaced by this hollow stillness that wasn't calm. It was cold. I tried to journal. The words didn't come. I made tea, didn't drink it. I stood by the window and stared at the trees. They didn't move, and neither did I. There was no sadness, no fear. Just a strange emptiness, like I wasn't Daniel anymore. And that's when it started, this unraveling. I wasn't prepared for it because it turns out when you remove every distraction, when there's no one to impress, no image to maintain, you don't find your true self waiting with open arms. You find a void, and that void stares back. At first, I tried to fight it. I paced the room, grabbed the journal, flipped back through every note I'd made, looking for something that made sense, but everything felt distant, like I had written those words in someone else's life. By noon, the silence had become unbearable. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I screamed loud, raw. No words, just a sound like a soul clawing at the walls of its own prison. But the silence didn't flinch. And in that moment, something cracked. What else I didn't know? I fell to my knees sobbing, not because of pain, but because I had finally run out of places to hide. That's when I whispered to no one, I don't know who I am anymore. And the silence finally spoke, not with words, but with a stillness so deep it felt like being held, not comforted, just seen, completely without needing to be fixed. I stayed there on the floor for a long time. No thoughts, no performance, just breath, just presence. Later that evening, still disoriented, I lit a candle and opened the small drawer beside the bed, looking for nothing in particular. That's when I found it, a folded piece of paper wedged under a book, old, yellowed, untouched. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but I knew the handwriting instantly. My father's. We hadn't spoken in over 15 years. He left when I was 17. No warning. No explanation, just disappeared. The last time I saw him, he was sitting on the porch staring at the sky. Didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. I opened the paper with shaking hands. It read, "If you're reading this, then you're ready. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I didn't know how to face what was inside me." And silence was the only mirror that ever told me the truth. I hope someday you'll understand what it means to walk into the void, not to escape the world, but to return to it whole. Your journey will be harder than mine, but I believe in you. I froze, that's all it said. No apology, no explanation. Just a whisper across time like Rumi's breeze at dawn. Behind the letter was a thin leather journal. I opened it. First page, Meditations, Vol. 2. My breath caught inside were fragments, quotes, reflections, all Stoic, all his. One entry said, "What is lost is not the self. What is lost is the illusion. We need anything outside ourselves to be whole. Another discomfort is not the enemy, it is the passage." I closed the journal and held it to my chest. I wasn't angry, I wasn't confused, I was still. Because for the first time, my father's silence made sense. He didn't run from us. He ran from himself, hoping maybe that solitude would catch him. And maybe it did. That night, I sat by the fireplace, the journal open in my lap, and I whispered something I hadn't said out loud in years. "I forgive you." The wind moved outside like a breath, and I swear, something inside me exhaled. The void didn't feel cold anymore. It felt sacred, like the fire you sit in when there's no way back, only through. I realized then that the void wasn't punishment. It wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to let go. Space to remember. Space to be born again without the masks, the roles, the weight. And in that space, I began to see the world differently, not as something to conquer, not as a stage to perform on, but as something to meet with open hands and clear eyes. The journal didn't give me answers, it gave me questions. But this time I wasn't afraid to sit with them, because sitting with the question, being fully present in it, was the answer I had been missing all along. I didn't leave the cabin the next day. I didn't need to. Something had shifted in me. I wasn't searching for answers anymore. I wasn't asking for clarity or meaning. I was just here, and somehow that was enough. I carried my father's journal with me like a companion, not for comfort, but for presence, the kind that doesn't need to speak to be heard. There was one entry I kept returning to. To be present is to give up the illusion of control, and in doing so, to reclaim the only freedom that ever mattered. Freedom of the mind. I underlined that sentence in pencil, sat with it, let it echo, because I had spent most of my life trying to control outcomes. Conversations, expectations, how people saw me, how I avoided myself. But presence had nothing to do with control. It was what remained when control fell away. I started noticing little things. The way the morning light moved across the wood floor, the breath of wind through the pine trees, the sound of my own footsteps on frozen ground. None of it asked for attention, but once I allowed everything came alive, I began each day in silence. No tasks, no list, just breath. Sometimes I'd journal, sometimes I wouldn't. I wasn't trying to document transformation, I was trying to live it. And strangely, things I used to rush through became sacred. Boiling water, sweeping the floor, chopping wood. Every motion felt like a return. Not to something new, but to something ancient I had forgotten how to feel. I remembered a line I had read by Epictetus. We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond. And that line became my practice, because on the fourth night, a snowstorm hit, heavy, sudden. By midnight, the power was gone. No heat, no lights. Just wind howling against the windows like a beast let loose. A week ago, I would have panicked. I would have paced, texted someone, checked the forecast. But now, I just lit a candle, sat in the dark, and I breathed. Not to calm myself, not to regulate anything, but because I was alive, and that was something worth noticing. I sat by the window watching snow swallow the world, and I thought maybe this is what presence really is. Not meditation, not quiet, but being with life exactly as it is. Without needing it to be different, without needing it to make sense. Just this moment, I remembered a phrase from Rumi's audio. The moment you accept what troubles you have been given, the door will open. And for the first time, I understood it without needing to understand it, because the door wasn't somewhere out there. It was here inside, opening slowly as I stopped trying to find it. The storm raged until morning, but I wasn't afraid. I was grateful for the test, for the silence, for the reminder. Because what I used to call silence wasn't really silence. It was avoidance, suppression noise, disguised as stillness. But now I was meeting the world without armor. And in that vulnerability, I found strength. Later that day, I stepped outside. The snow was knee-deep, but I didn't care. I walked barefoot onto the porch. The cold stung, but I welcomed it. Each breath turned to mist. And in that breath, I felt fully present, not thinking, not analyzing. Just here I whispered something to the sky, not a prayer, not a declaration. Just two words, I'm ready. I didn't know for what, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't rushing through life to escape myself. I had slowed down enough to remember who was always there beneath the performance. The next few days became simpler, more intentional, not because I tried harder, but because I stopped trying at all. There was this one moment I won't forget. I was washing dishes, no music, no thoughts, just warm water on cold hands. And I felt it, this strange, quiet joy. Not happiness, not excitement, but something deeper, a kind of grounded warmth that didn't need a reason. And in that moment, I whispered, maybe this is what peace feels like. Not the absence of problems, but the absence of resistance. And that realization changed everything. I no longer needed solitude to feel still, because the stillness was something I now carried. It wasn't tied to the cabin. It wasn't tied to the journal. It was mine, not owned, not controlled, but remembered. Presence had returned, not as a practice, but as a state of being. And in that return, I realized I had never been missing. I had only been distracted. It had been 9 days in the cabin. 9 days without signal, without headlines, without pretending. And then the phone rang. It was early, maybe 6 a.m. The old rotary on the kitchen wall buzzed once then again. For a second, I just stared at it. I had almost forgotten what that sound felt like. I picked up the receiver. My sister's voice was tight. "Mom's in the hospital," she said. "It's her heart, you should come." There was no panic in her tone, no drama. Just that quiet urgency that tells you something real is happening. I didn't ask questions, didn't check weather, didn't debate. I packed the journal, folded my father's letter and left the cabin. The same way I arrived, silent, slow. Aware, the drive back felt different. I wasn't running from stillness. This time I was carrying it with me. The city returned like static. Billboards, traffic, faces staring into phones. But I didn't flinch. Something in me had settled. At the hospital, everything smelled like bleach in time-white walls, worn chairs, voices trying to whisper pain into submission. When I saw my mom, she was asleep, thin pale tubes in her arm, a monitor keeping rhythm. I didn't cry. I just pulled the chair close and sat. And I stayed. For hours, I didn't need to speak. Didn't need her to wake up for the moment to matter. I just needed to be there fully. I opened the journal and began to read slowly, softly. Passages from Marcus Aurelius, lines from my father, and finally one from Rumi. Don't grieve, anything you lose comes round in another form. It felt like he had written that for me. For this exact moment, I reached for her hand, cold but steady, and I whispered, "You don't have to do anything, Mom. I'm here not to fix, not to change, just to love her without needing anything back." That was the shift I had always thought love meant: holding on, fighting, controlling, saving. But now I saw it clearly. Love is presence, not possession. It's the willingness to be with what is without resistance. A nurse walked in and asked if I needed anything. I smiled and said, "No, thank you," because for once I really didn't. I read to her the letter Dad left. I don't know if she heard it, but I think I needed to say it more than she needed to hear it. At some point, I closed the journal, leaned back, and just watched her breathe. Each inhale was a gift, each pause a reminder that everything I've been learning, stillness, surrender, detachment, it wasn't meant to be practiced alone on a mountain. It was meant for this, for sitting beside someone you love, knowing you can't control the outcome, and choosing to love them anyway. Later that night, my sister joined me. She asked how I was so calm. I said I stopped trying to control things I never had power over. She didn't respond right away, just looked at Mom and held her hand. And in that silence, I felt something pass between us. Not words, not advice, just presence. There was no climax, no dramatic goodbye. Mom stayed in the hospital for a few more days. She improved slightly, but the truth is I wasn't attached to the result. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared deeply without needing certainty. That was my Stoic test. Not a trial of endurance, but a test of clarity. Could I stay open-hearted in the face of helplessness? Could I show up not to do, but to be? The answer, I think, was yes. When I left the hospital, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Not because things were resolved, but because I didn't need them to be. There was a line from Seneca I'd underlined months ago, but never fully understood until now. True happiness is to enjoy the present without anxious dependence upon the future. And in that moment, leaving the hospital under fading city lights, I finally understood what happiness meant. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't control, it was choosing to remain present. Even when it hurts, even when you don't know how it ends. Especially then. I returned to the office 2 weeks later. Same hallway, same floor, same glass walls, reflecting ambition, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I walked past the framed awards, the company mission statement etched into the entryway wall, words like innovation, disruption, and legacy. And I thought I used to live for this. Now I could barely feel it. Not from detachment, but from clarity. It was like watching a movie I'd already seen too many times. Same lines, same roles. And I knew mine by heart, except I didn't want to perform anymore. I sat at my desk, checked my calendar, felt the surge of emails climbing into the triple digits. Then I closed the laptop and I just sat. This time without urgency, without shame, without needing to catch up to anything. One of my coworkers passed by, smiled, said, "Good to have you back." I nodded, but in my mind I was already gone. Not out of resentment, not in judgment, just in peace. A kind of peace that whispered, "You've climbed this mountain already. There's nothing left to prove." I met with my CEO that afternoon. We sat in his office walls lined with books on leadership and hustle culture. He asked if I was ready to hit the ground running again. I smiled. "No," I said gently. "I think it's time I step back." He blinked. "Step back from what?" "From trying to be someone I'm not." I replied, "I'd like to offer my help, but not as an executive. I'm not meant to lead teams anymore. I'm meant to help people find stillness because I had to lose everything to find mine." He didn't understand, not fully, but that was okay. I wasn't there to convince him. I was there to choose truth. Later that week, I packed up my office, boxed the awards, donated the suits, and walked out the door with nothing but a journal, my father's letter, and a smile that didn't need a reason. I didn't have a plan, just an intention to live simply, to live clearly, to live present. I started consulting on the side, not for money, but to help burnout leaders remember what it means to breathe. No PowerPoints, no performance hacks, just silence, reflection, and one simple question: what are you trying so hard to outrun? Some answered, some didn't, but they all listened. And that was enough. Each month I began hosting retreats, small cabins, remote locations, phones left at the door. People arrived tense, unsure, full of noise. But after a few days of stillness, something always broke open, not dramatically, not loudly, just enough for them to remember that they were never missing. They were just buried beneath the static. I never preached. I never promised answers. I just held space, like the cabin held space for me, like the void held me when I couldn't hold myself. One morning, a guest asked if I believed Rumi really could change your life. In 30 minutes, I laughed. Not directly, I said, but if the soul is ready, even 30 seconds of truth can open a door. And sometimes that door never closes again. A few months later, I stood in front of a circle of 10 people, all silent, all still. The fire was low, the room warm with breath. I read the same passage that cracked me open the night I froze in my car. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. Then I paused, looked around the room, and I smiled. Not because I had found some grand truth, but because I no longer needed to. The truth wasn't something to grasp. It was something to live in this presence, this breath, this space between stimulus and reaction. This was life, real life, no filters, no rush, no roles. Just the quiet strength of showing up, fully humbly now.